was going to go, but I thought that that was actually great, to be completely honest. I thought that really went well. I was very nervous about the time. Basically, we were starting at a different time than the lessons normally are. But thank you all very much for showing up for that. Thank you all very much for participating and for playing good games. I thought we had a lot of good games in there. I think the record was somewhere within the realm that I wanted, but there were a good 10 or so people that won, and another 5 to 10 I think that drew. And yeah, congratulations to everyone. Thank you all very much for playing. I really appreciate you supporting the stream and supporting this special event. And now we're back to doing our chess lessons. So for anybody who's new, this channel basically exists to give free chess lessons to everyone. I guess I sort of believe that chess lessons should be free. I think that with modern technology, we can basically make chess lessons completely free for everyone. And I think that that's really what we should shoot for, right? I mean, all things equal, we have these, we have this great way of, basically spreading digital content all over the world. And yeah, that allows us to basically give chess lessons for free. Chess has been around a long time, but this is actually the first time that if you can basically give a chess lesson and people all over the world can just decide to join in for free. So in my mind, this is really the point of the stream. I really appreciate everyone playing. I really appreciate everybody joining the stream earlier today. Yeah, now we can get back onto our broader mission, which is just making sure that chess lessons at a master level are free and available to everyone. This is the goal. This is what we want to do. So really levels the playing field to make chess lessons free for everyone, and that is why I do this channel. And why other people who are very helpful in supporting this channel support this channel. I don't want any donations. I don't want any money. I appreciate any support, any effort that people provide. But the goal here really is to give free chess lessons to everyone. That's what that's what I decided that I wanted to do. That's what I decided is possible to do. And the whole world's gonna have free chess lessons. I'm gonna work towards that end, and I think that will succeed. So anyways, thank you all very much for being here. We're back to work, and yeah, thank you all very much for playing in the simul today. I really appreciate it. All right, on to the next thing. So here basically we have to kind of we're switching gears. We're looking at GM chess games is what I was interested in looking at. I was interested in looking at basically GM play, and then 3 of our player games. But let's take a look. I have this file that's got a good PGN of a good collection of very high level games. This is a Wikand Z 2017. I figured that if we take a look at these super GMs playing each other, we might learn something. And this is the game Wesley So versus Magnus Carlsen. And let's look. All right. Let me just load the analysis board. Cool. And here is Wesley So playing white against Magnus Carlsen. So here I think this might this is a draw, drawn after the 33rd move. But let's take a look. Let's understand the openings and understand kind of what's going on in this game. So here basically white's playing d4, d5, c4, c6, knight to f3, knight to f6. Okay, very standard opening. Basically Slav defense, Slav potentially turning into the semi-Slav. E3, bishop to f5, knight to c3. Black opts to keep it as a pure Slav structure with c6 and d5. A6, knight to e5, knight to d7, queen to b3. And basically here, I think this is a fine way for white to play for an advantage here. This is an aggressive threat on b7. White maintains the initiative, and overall, white is up by about half a pawn. So good stuff. Queen to c7, pawn takes, pawn takes, queen to d5, knight takes, and then basically here, white has this kind of fractured pawn structure. Black has this queen pawn, and if black wants to play queen takes e5, then on the next move, the white queen can play queen takes b7. So yeah, it's basically somewhere close to equals, but I think both sides need to kind of develop. This bishop ends up going to bishop to d2. This bishop goes to bishop to e2. And basically, natural development will provide the best path forward for both sides. So bishop to d2 here, queen to e5, bishop to c3, queen to c7. Overall here, white's better. I guess, in general, white's up by about, I don't know, a quarter of a pawn. But just standard developing moves. That's what's going to be helpful here. White's got a slightly better developed bishop pair. and basically is basically down a pawn. Here white opts for bishop to c3 as opposed to queen takes b7. In this situation, basically, what are the ideas? I think white can play bishop to e2. I think white can play rook to c1, castle comfortably. But overall, this provides a good opportunity for white to equalize. This pawn structure is technically symmetrical, but white has better development. So I like white's position a little bit better than I like black's position here. Queen to c4, queen takes, bishop to c8, bishop to b3. White's got strong bishops facing in towards f7, facing in towards g7, facing in towards h8. And overall here, I think white's going to end up in a situation where white's going to control a lot of squares. Black's going to aim for quick development, but first he needs to defend this g7 pawn some way before being able to develop the dark squared bishop. And here bishop takes g7. I guess I was wrong. I was thinking bishop takes g7, and there wouldn't be a follow-up for black. But bishop takes g7, rook to g8, bishop to e5, and then rook takes g2. I guess. Kind of interested in this line. Bishop takes g7, rook to g8, bishop to e5, rook takes g2, bishop to bishop to g3. Interesting. So black's up by about a pawn, and yeah, I guess that's that on that. So bishop to e7 allows bishop takes g7. The king on can play to e2, bishop to e4, and overall here, I guess I would say that I still like white's position. Still has initiative. White can still play rook a to c1, rook a to d1, and get safe development. So here, this is big. Rook a c1, rook takes, bishop to or rook to g5, bishop to f4, and basically here, now the pawn structures maintain symmetry, are both fractured. We're probably headed for a draw. So anyways, I guess I'm kind of underwhelmed by this game, but this is kind of the highest level GM draws. I mean, neither player is willing to risk, an enormous amount in order to push forward. So it ends up in a drawn position. That makes sense. That's intuitive. Let's look at this. Let's look at this center. I think the furthest. Let's look at the furthest point that this ever got. Hey, welcome, Abraham. Thank you very much for joining the stream. Thanks for the. Thanks for joining and congratulations. You were the first one who won today, so I really wanted to give you a shout out on that. I gave a good. I don't know if you're on the server, Abraham, but I gave you a nice shout out on the Discord server. Just so you have it. I don't know if you already have it, but yeah, please if you're interested, join us. This is the Discord server, and feel free to click on it. Feel free to go there, and with that, you should be able to get a pretty good you should be able to get a pretty good understanding of kind of what we're about. But the main point here is we're interested in giving free chess lessons. That's what this stream is most of the time. I'm looking at simuls, I'm looking at that kind of stuff. But honestly, I just want to give free chess lessons. Chess lessons should be free. I don't think people should charge for chess lessons because they can give chess lesson content for free. And I think it's a little silly to pay for it at this point. And really, I just want to kind of spread that message. We give free chess lessons for 3 hours a day on this server or on this stream, and I'm very happy to have you here. So anyways, this ends up being a draw, a very high-level draw between GMs. It shows kind of, ways that white can play queen's pawn openings, knight to e5, knight to d7, queen to b3. Just very comfortable, symmetrical play for both players. Neither one pushes it too hard, and so in Carlsen draw. So very interesting game, very high-level game, 99.5 for both players. These graphs are crazy. These 99.5, 99.5, these guys are wild. Very, very high-level play. But it was also helped by the fact that neither of them really took any risks in this game. So yeah. But thanks for being here, Nosik. Thank you very much for being here, Abraham. Thanks for joining me on the stream. So I thought this might give a good sense of kind of what we're, what I'm trying to do with this stream. I think giving free simuls is awesome, but really what I want to do is I really want to change the pricing model for chess lessons. I think it's silly that people pay for chess lessons. They don't have to, and we can give this material online. So this is our kind of test model, and I've done several hundred hours worth of free chess lessons so far, and we'll likely do several hundred more. It's really a good. I think it's really a good way to spread knowledge, and that's sort of what my main point is. But that said, the simul's are really fun. It's really nice of you guys to come, and really nice of you guys to be there for that. And I thought it was really a great success. So we'll continue to do those side events. They're a lot of fun, but mainly I just wanted to give a free resource so that that people don't have to pay for chess lessons anymore. Because I think paying for chess lessons, the money often comes from a questionable place. I mean, usually that's charged to governments, and usually it's charged to nonprofit organizations, and they're paying for something that they can very easily get for free online. So that, in my mind, is something that the world needs to kind of improve on, and my hope is that this stream will be able to be successful in making free chess lessons available to everyone. It's just not something that you need to pay for anymore, and it's not something that people who have any kind of financial concerns at all should be paying for. So that's what I'm doing here. That's what the plan is. And thank you all very much for participating in this for participating in this experiment. All right, let's take a look. This is Sergei Karyakin's game against Giri. Again from Tata Steel, very high level games. Let's see if this one I know is also a draw. Actually, I should probably pick a decisive game. Let's see how super GMs actually beat each other as opposed to how they draw each other. I know these guys are really draw heavy, but yeah. No, that's awesome. That's awesome, Abraham. Honestly, like, I just want people to know, like, I guess I would say that, the happiest thing the thing in the world that would make me happiest is if a better teacher at a higher chess playing ability came in and gave lessons for free as well. Like, that is my end goal, is to basically make sure that, chess lessons remain a free resource. I guess I don't believe in paying for them. I don't believe that that's helpful to the world to have have people paying for chess lessons when they can get them for free online. So I figure that providing value online for free is the way to go, and the project means a lot to me. So that's what I'm going for. Anyways, e4, e5, knight to f3, knight to c6, bishop to b5, knight to f6, okay? So the knight f6 is a pretty direct way. This is called the Berlin defense. Basically, with knight f6, white's challenging immediately on e4, while black is challenging on e5. The common moves for white here, the most common is castles, the second most common is knight to c3, and the third most common is d3. All of those are playable. All of those move white's position and development forward in a given way. And yeah, so with basically with white's ability to push this forward with d3, black can continue to develop. C3, castles, bishop takes c6, pawn takes c6, knight takes e5, and yeah, I mean, basically I think here white should have a solid position. The e4 pawn is defended, so normally when knight takes e5, the rook will have chances, rook playing to e8, queen playing to e7, those types of things. And basically here, black's best idea, I think objectively the best play and probably the most common opening line, is to just play d5 here and challenge in the center. If black can fracture the center, if black can get an isolated pawn on e4, that's going to be a really good situation for white. So d4, bishop to b6, castles, pawn takes e4. Here, I guess I would just say I like, I like white's position. Even with the pawn having taken on e4, I think that this threat, basically this pawn structure is bad for black. White's going to find ways to exploit it. And these are two super GMs playing, so obviously they're going to play lines that are relatively close to equal. But yeah, in this opening, this Ruy Lopez Berlin defense, this is going to end up being a relatively equal middle game position, but asymmetrical. So the drawing chances are going to be way lower than than they were previously. So I think here white plays bishop to g5, c5. C5 is a good attempt to try to get rid of one of the double isolated pawns. Makes sense as a move. Knight to d2. Pawn takes c5, d4, and they basically list this as an inaccuracy. So let's think about this for a second. What should black do here, and why is c takes d4 immediately not the strongest? Well, first this pawn on e4 is hanging. So pawn takes d4, knight takes e4. That's going to be a powerful pin on this knight on f6. White should be able to fracture this kingside pawn structure. And yeah, I guess I would say that with knight takes e4. That threat, bishop to g5 facing into d8, that's going to be, the best way to play this. So c takes d4 allows this immediate knight takes e4. The engine is pushing for bishop to b7, and that's probably objectively better. Again, it's kind of amazing how great these guys are. But yeah, basically they basically knight to d2, bishop to b7, and the attack basically sort of fizzles out. There's not really much there. This threat on e4 could be potentially good. This bishop on g5 facing d8 could be potentially good. But yeah, c takes d4, knight takes e4, pawn takes c3, queen f3. And basically here, the threats on f6 are going to be pretty difficult for black to deal with. So I guess this was an error, basically, right? It let white get this aggressive pin on f6, and then with, pawn takes c3, queen to f3 looks like a very difficult threat for black to deal with. You've got the bishop facing into d8, you got the knight pin on f6, the queen on f3, and overall here, I guess what I would say is, this is a well-executed attack for white. I mean, this is how GMs attack. It's just very, very sound, very strong play, and yeah, this is going to offer some good chances for white. It is interesting. We get to see the dial move a little bit out of, it's like so few times in this tournament this dial moved. But yeah, we get to take a look. This basically, this is more volatility than the last one for sure. This time the Super GM played a 90% game, so really an off game for them, as opposed to the 98% that they've been throwing up every other game. Queen to f3 playing, basically queen to f3 facing, putting pressure on this f6 knight. Bishop to b7, bishop takes, queen takes, queen takes. Queen takes is an error. Queen takes, I think, allows knight to d7, forking this exchange. That's a big, that's a big improvement for black. Better for black to just bite the bullet and play pawn takes f3 or pawn takes f6. This fractures black pawn structure, but with perfect accuracy, which at Super GM level is more possible. Black should be able to defend. Hey, welcome, Lauren. Thanks for joining the stream. Thanks for being here. We had a crazy simul. It was awesome. More than 50 people decided to play, which was really cool. Yeah, maybe you guys can make it for the next one, or but yeah, thanks for being here, Lauren. So yeah, our next simul, for anyone who's interested, it's Tuesday at 8:45 a.m. Eastern time. But I really appreciate the final score. All right, so the final score is kind of interesting. The first thing about the final score is, while I was setting up the simul, the account crashed, which was kind of crazy. So chess.com had a full crash. It got overloaded somehow, and I lost 50 games in a row, and my rating went down like 200 points. So that was pretty funny. And then so I went 0-50 in it was really two simuls. The first one I went 0-50, and then the second one I went like 34, 11, and 6, I think was the final score. But yeah, well, I mean, it was, but yeah, we'll see if I play some more. I'm sure my rating would go back to normal pretty soon. But I just thought it was funny. Everyone got a team win, 50-0 against me in the first simul, and then the second one was funny. So G takes f6, yeah, so queen takes f6 is not as good as G takes f6, but yeah, it was a lot of fun. It was a fun tournament, and I appreciated everybody showing up for it. So back to the free chess lessons. Queen to f6, knight to d7, queen to g6, queen takes, knight takes, and white's up in exchange. Rook to b7. 34, 11, and 6, I think is correct. So not bad. Somewhere between 65 and 75%. I'm pretty happy with it, to be honest. There are a few games that were abandoned. I don't really know how to count those, but anyways, I would say it was yeah, it was really a fun event. So that was the main point. Hey, welcome, it's Richard. Thanks. I don't know. Try next time. The next simul's Tuesday at 8:45 a.m. So in about 3 days from now. And yeah, we'll get that started too. I don't know. Yeah, see if you can make it. It'll be really interesting. So rook to d1, rook to h8, g3, rook to h5. But basically, white's just having kind of a solid increase in eval here. Knight takes e4. Knight takes e3, queen to f6, bishop takes, queen takes, knight to d7. Okay, cool. So basically this this knight is forking the queen and the rook, and white's up by about 3 points, I'd say. Looks like about 3, an exchange up, and white white and GM black will play this like a GM on defense, but white will play this like a GM on offense. So rook to h8. And white's up White's lead continues to increase here. Black continues to play, but yeah, by this point, they use excellent tech. White uses excellent technique, um, uh, and yeah, king to g2, king to f6, rook to h6. All of this, basically White's up by about half or by about 5 pawns, and gradually and very systematically limits Black's mobility. This technique I thought was really cool. So let's just take it from the point. I mean, realistically, this is dead one at a GM level. Basically, an exchange. An exchange up with a doubled pawn compensation for Black. But I just think the technique is really great here. Looking at the way that this rook basically forced the king over to the f file. So rook to d2, rook to h8. And with rook to d2, White's threatening things like, so on king f6, like for example, the rook would play to e2. The rook will control the 7th and start attacking the pawns. And here, the rooks basically corral the king onto the f file. So rook to d2, rook to f6, and then rook to g6 is slightly worse than c5, I guess. But basically here the computer is sort of just resigning as White. So. Or as Black, sorry. So overall, solid way to push this king into a smaller and smaller space. Basically, White uses the 2 rooks to cause this whole consolidation on the king side. So it's great technique, really interesting to see, and basically White should be good. White's gonna have mating threats even. Things like rook to d3, rook to f3. But yeah, I thought this overall was a really interesting, game. I mean, basically, let's take a look at where things started to go. I mean, again, it's not like they're big tactical errors, but first, White starts off with this opening, which is, ambitious, and basically Black ends up playing this c takes d4, which was an error. So c takes d4, I think, was the real error in this game. With c takes d4, knight takes e4, pawn takes c3, queen to f3, and basically pressure being put on this f6 knight is decisive for White. This is going to offer White a lot of opportunities to break open the Black king side and win at least a little bit of material, if not a lot of material. Optimal play, again, bishop to b7, bishop takes, queen takes, queen takes. And here, again, there was the choice between either taking g takes, which fractures the pawn structure, or queen takes, which loses the exchange. Queen takes is considered to be slightly worse in terms of, objective play, but both are pretty bad for Black. Here, this is kind of, following an old, basically an old strategy, which is that it's better to be down material than at a lasting positional disadvantage. That's the point of this. So yeah, with this, queen takes, knight to d7. Black is basically making the choice on this move. So Black's choices here are g takes f6 or queen takes f6. It's up to Black to decide what to do, and pawn takes f6 is going to leave Black with less of a material loss. I mean, materially speaking, the position's still equal. In fact, I think Black's up by a little bit, but it's going to leave Black with a lasting positional disadvantage. So Black is basically going with the concept, if you can avoid a lasting positional, basically if you can sacrifice material to avoid a lasting positional disadvantage, you should do it. And I think this G takes move, basically G takes versus Queen takes, is a great demonstration of this. Black is choosing to lose material, lose a full exchange, as opposed to have to fight with an open king side. Here, this is still bad for Black, obviously. I mean, now Black's just objectively down material, but the position's not particularly bad. I mean, this bishop's relatively healthy, and White has some advantages. Have I ever won or played a Grandmaster? Yeah, I play them pretty frequently in bullet chess. In bullet chess, it depends on the Grandmaster, but there's a wide range of how good Grandmasters are at bullet. Grandmasters can play, they can play 1 minute games. So some of them can really play 1 minute. Those guys are rated about 3,000. Some of them really can't play 1 minute. A lot of those guys are rated like 24, 2,500. And I'm about 24, 2,500. So I get a good amount of wins against Grandmasters. Overall, they're still way better on average, but the weaker Grandmasters at bullet, I can have a pretty good shot at. in Bullet Online. Over the board, I've beaten I think 3 or 4. I'd have to think about it. I think I can think of at least 3. But yeah, I've beaten a few grandmasters over the board. In New York City, you actually get great opportunities to play very high level players, so that's always good. But yeah, so this game is really interesting. But I thought it was valuable looking. Basically, black is playing for a lasting positional disadvantage against or basically playing for a lasting positional. Black play opts for a material disadvantage as opposed to a lasting positional disadvantage, and that's what happens in this position. Obviously, he gives up. He basically makes this. He makes this error where he hangs on d4. But he ends up in a pretty good situation. So, anyways, that ended up playing out pretty well. And let's take a look. We can look at Aronian drawing. There's a lot of draws here. Let's take a look at Carlsen beat another super GM as black. I mean, let's think about that. Beating a 2800 rated player as black or a 2750 rated player as black is an insanely difficult thing to do. So let's look at this. This is Carlsen playing black and winning against a 2750. Okay, so Carlsen opts for this e6 response to the queen's pawn opening. I didn't know this is called the Horwitz defense. It's called the Horwitz defense, we know. Interesting. F5, this transposes into the Dutch. Basically, I guess one of the advantages of playing this Horwitz defense as black is that you can turn it either into a queen's pawn game with d5 or into a Dutch with f5. Interesting. Interesting. Yeah, I mean, we looked at an old Anderson game, Lauren. But yeah, that ended up being basically he was a very good classical romantic era player. So yeah, we should take a look at more of those classical games. I'm biased towards the more recent ones, but yeah, the old classic ones are good. So anyways, d4, e6, c4, f5. Yeah, I mean, that hyper-modern style, it's really something. Knight to f6, bishop to g2, d5, knight to f3, bishop to d6, knight to c3. Okay, so, this is basically a classical Dutch defense. No g6, no bishop to f, no g6, no bishop to g7. C6, bishop to f4, pawn takes, and basically here I think that white is better. So yeah, it is. I mean, those hyper modern players. I guess I would say that the hyper modern style, the style of basically intentionally giving your opponent advantages. That style is difficult for me to acknowledge as good. That doesn't mean that it can't be very useful. I think there's a lot of times when, a hyper-modern style can help a very strong player beat a strong player. Those are the situations in which I see the hyper-modern basically playing for your opponent's advantage. But yeah, those old hyper-modern games, the ones that undermine the center, don't play for center control, and give your opponent both the center and spatial advantage, it's amazing. They are played at an extremely high level, so obviously they're not terrible. But I struggle to think about how how it can be helpful to give your opponent two big key advantages, space and center control. But yeah, no. I mean, they have beautiful games for sure. Like, and it's a great tool for like GMs to beat IMs, and capitalize on their really experienced high level understanding. But I always am like, play for the center, play for space. I mean, yeah, but it's always interesting. But yeah, anyways, those Anderson games are great, so I'm always happy to look at them, Lauren. Yeah, so here basically, I don't know, bishop to f4. I'm sort of surprised that they consider this to be the best move. Let's go back here. The main move here is castles. So this is an old Dutch, right? So this is like classical Dutch. C6, castles for white, and then bishop to f4 is playable for white. So yeah, so castles here is the main line, played about 90% of the time, 85% of the time, and with castles, basically Black's going to have strength on this diagonal, but not a great ability to break it open. Black has. Let's actually just slow this down. Let's look at this position. This is. Yeah, no. Please, please send games. We can take a look at. Maybe we can look at some old hyper modern. Anderson. Anderson, Morphe, Steinitz, like the real classic guys. I would definitely be interested in looking over those games at some point, Lauren. We can make that. We can make that an old GM, or make that our thematic GM night at some point. But yeah, this is the Dutch classical. Cool. And basically solid play for Black here. So what are the big strengths for Black in this position? This knight's developed on f6. This bishop's developed on d6. The center is big for Black. He has complete control over the e4 square, with a weakness on the e5 square. That's basically, that's pretty common for the Dutch. The Dutch frequently has these kind of gaps on e4 and strengths on, or gaps on e5 and strengths for e4 for Black. But yeah, basically, I don't know. I mean, it's very interesting. This bishop's developed, this knight's developed, this king can castle, this knight can play to d7. And overall here, I basically like Black's play. White can play bishop to f4, bishop takes, pawn takes. And this, I guess, this continues to offer roughly the same chances for Black, but yeah, this required White to spend a move not developing. Basically, this bishop developed just to play to a square where this bishop could take it, and this pawn would be doubled. So White very voluntarily doubled his f pawns here. The control that White has over e5 is very large, but he already had control over e5, so. Anyways, I'm not sure how much this offers in terms of improving over the main line, but obviously it's accurate and playable at this level. So bishop takes, pawn takes, castles, e3. White's up by about 0.6. Okay, 0.6. Black can probably play something like knight to e4 if he wants, get the knight posted. But the main problem now for Black is that he's relatively underdeveloped. White has, this bishop is bad. This bishop is frequently bad in the Dutch. One thing to know about the Dutch games, basically this bishop frequently faces, these pawn structures and has to do a lot of maneuvering in order to get out of that. That's a big thing about the light-scored bishop in the Dutch. Black needs to develop, but he doesn't have the ability to develop that bishop. So I think instead knight to d7 is probably good. Bishop to d7, queen b3, queen c7, castles. White's up by about a pawn. Black's going to have play over this knight to e4. Probably bishop to e8, knight to d7, maybe pawn takes and then knight to b6 could be a plan. But yeah, this kind of back rank maneuvering, this kind of very condensed maneuvering, this is a common theme to a lot of Dutch games. And yeah, there's no real tactical break here, but it's just basically very high level maneuvering, looking through the positional, the positional aspects here, and another thing that's very valuable for Black here is the opportunity to get rid of this e6 pawn. This e6 pawn is backwards. It's basically the worst pawn on Black's board. b7 isn't great either, but this pawn on e6 is the weakest pawn for Black. White can play moves like knight to g5 at like an opportune time and have like a threat on e6, which will be very annoying for Black to deal with. So overall here, interesting, I think, and rook to fc1, rook queen e7, defense is maintained over b7. Again, I don't think that Black can get rid of, Black obviously in this situation gains a lot by playing e5. I think that's going to be really far down the road if that ever happens. But yeah, I mean, basically, Black is maneuvering with a cramped position, as frequently happens in the Dutch. Queen to a3, queen takes, pawn takes. This, again, I don't know. I mean, we've gone over before kind of the value of doubled isolated rook pawns. Basically, this pawn structure, these two pawns here are worth barely more than a pawn. Like we've done like kind of computerized analysis of this, and like those two pawns are worth like 1.2 or 1.3 pawns. So White gives up a key advantage to get in receiving those doubled isolated pawns. For compensation for playing, so basically this maneuver, just so we want to understand it, this queen to a3 maneuver, which allows queen takes a3, pawn takes a3, This is basically white giving up almost a pawn. Like, it's basically voluntarily giving up the b pawn, because these two pawns are basically not worth more than one pawn. But it gives up the b pawn in order to clear this file for the rook, and for the rook to attack on the queen side. So that was white's strategy in playing queen to a3. You'd sort of wonder, why do you spend a move basically doubling your rook pawns? But that's it. It's basically trading these doubled rook pawns. This queen takes a3, pawn takes a3. Yeah, basically this, and rook to b1. It's basically volunteering double. Yeah, exactly. No, you're exactly right, Nosik. Yeah, that is what white has done twice in this game, and white is still better, which is kind of crazy, right? Here the doubled pawns were volunteered in order to get better center control. Basically, the pawn wasn't doing much on g3, so now it's facing e5 and preventing this e5 push from ever occurring. And then the other time, with the queen a3, queen takes a3, pawn takes a3. Again, completely volunteering this doubled rook pawn, so that this rook on b1 is facing against b7. So basically, it's almost as if he opted out. Like, it's like, basically taking away his own pawn just for the open file and having that be worth it. That's what's interesting about that maneuver, queen to a3. But yeah, that's exactly right. Well said, Nosik. Okay, 1.3, knight to e4, knight takes, pawn takes, knight to g5. I think probably rook to f6, threats on or defense of e6. This is what I was talking about. Basically, this knight moving to g5 and having this sustained defense on e6. That's big for white. Big opportunity for white. This is a very common type of move in this Dutch, capitalizing on that weak backward e6 pawn. Very common. Rook to f6 defends it. e4. E4 seems to drop one of the escape squares for the knight. After h6, knight to h3, pawn takes h3. I think this is fine, honestly. The end result of all this maneuvering, basically, is what this ends up being, is this d5 pawn trading for this f2 pawn. So overall, if you're looking at the situation, like, were all these pawns, so the knight moves to e4, and then the first volitional move for white is knight takes e4. And then black plays d takes e4, knight to g5, rook to f6, f3, h6, knight to h3, and basically, this f3 pawn is facing this pawn that's now on e4. So just to show you, look, keep an eye on the d5 pawn here. So the d5 pawn here is an important one. I mean, basically, this d5 pawn is doing a lot in this position. It's providing a key point of access for black in the center. It gives black a lot of center control, more than any other pawn on the board. So with knight takes e5, I'm a little bit curious about f takes e5, or f takes e4 here, as opposed to d takes e4. But I guess f takes e4, knight to e. So let's look at the f takes e4 line. F takes e4, knight to e4. Knight to e5, knight takes e5, f takes e5, and then I guess you're stuck in kind of a symmetrical, not super good for white position. This seems like kind of not that. It's basically a symmetrical pawn structure, and not particularly good for either side. So I don't know. I mean, is that better for whites? I'm not sure. So, but anyways, the engine's giving d takes e4 is better, but it's complicated. Both f takes and d takes are promising for black. Rook to f6 defends e6, h6, knight to h3, pawn takes, bishop takes, this overall here, white's up by about 1.8 pawns, but what ends up happening, what I really wanted to show about this with d takes, is with f3. This pawn on f2 is the one that ended up trading for the pawn on d5, remember? So this pawn on d5, which was very useful, ended up playing to e4, then f3, and trading for this pawn which had moved to f3 from f2. So basically, the d5 pawn trades for the f2 pawn after all those trades. And ultimately, that's got to be a good trade for white, right? Like, this pawn on d5 was doing a lot of things, and this pawn on f2 was not doing very much at all. So overall, if you're trying to assess the the value of the trade from front from front to back. You're basically thinking about the relative value of d5 versus the relative value of f2, and that has to be a trade that's good for white, right? This is a very useful pawn being traded for a very not useful pawn. So when you go through this whole tactical maneuver as white's doing it with the idea of trading this d5 pawn for this f2 pawn in mind. And it's a good trade. It trades away a useful pawn for black versus a relatively useless pawn for white. So anyways, very interesting outcome. White's up by a good amount here. Let's keep looking. Carlsen, or basically, so let's take it from white's perspective now. Actually, let's keep it as black. Sorry, it's confusing to flip back and forth. So let's take it from black's perspective. White's up by a good amount here. These two pawns, basically white has a connected passed pawn, so this should be very dangerous for black. Bishop to h4, d5, bishop to d7, pawn takes, pawn takes. Okay. Rook to b3, rook to f6, and here I guess white's about equal. But yeah, this was volatile. Let's look at this, because this seemed a little bit worse than your average GM play. Like here, white's up by 3 pawns. What happened? Bishop takes e4, I guess, is worse. I mean, bishop takes e4 gives the minor piece, right? To basically, white trades his minor piece for black's minor piece, and now white is left with the bishop, or black is left with the bishop, and white is left with the knight. So let's really think about this. So after bishop to d7, they're evaluating it as 2.37. Maybe that's a little bit generous because these sublines seem to have lower evals than that. Bishop takes, pawn takes. It's about 0.89. Okay. Knight to c5, bishop to g4, rook to e1. Yeah, I mean, it very quickly turned to equal. That's what's sort of interesting about this. I'm sort of wondering about the evals this whole time, right? A very strange thing is happening with the calculator, where basically it's saying that the overall lines have way better evals than the sublines, and the sublines are supposed to come off of the lines. So I don't really understand what's happening. I guess that these are the second best options, right? Knight to c5. Yeah, I'm confused because these evals should be in line with this one, I think. Anyways, whatever. It goes from about 3 up to equals very quickly. So yeah, bishop to g4, rook to e1, rook to c8, and I like black's position here. Rook takes, knight to c6, and yeah, looks equal, looks fine. But black is pressing. Black's pressing an attack on the king side. b6, d6, king to h7. Overall here, I like black's position. Black has to keep a great eye on this e6 pawn. That's going to be very important throughout this game. But yeah, knight to f2, rook takes, knight takes, rook takes, rook takes. And then rook to d4, and basically black is now better. So really letting this connected pass pawn. So on move what is it, like 25, 26. This pawn is it's a connected pass pawn on the d file. So intuitively you would think that this would really be a lot of trouble for black, but black's technique is so good in kind of defending this. So d5, bishop to d7, pawn takes, bishop to g4. I think basically here white's it's 0.12 for white. Black plays rook to c8, knight takes, rook takes. Now I would say, I don't know, it's about equal, but I would still take white. I mean, basically this bishop is powerful, and this position is becoming more and more open, so that this bishop is getting more files for or basically bigger diagonals to attack on. But I would figure that this connected pass pawn for white should be a pretty good trump in most of these positions. So I don't know. It's interesting. It's interesting the way that this plays out. Rook to b3, rook f6, knight to e4. Rook takes, king to f2. And yeah, I guess what I would say is just, black corrals this connected pass pawn very effectively. Should white have... Hey, thank you very much for the follow, Quasi. Thank you very much for joining the stream. Thanks for being here. And yeah, we were just finishing up this GM game, Carlsen versus Eljanov. And yeah, I guess I'm just very impressed by black and his ability to kind of corral this c pawn and this d pawn here. I don't know. Maybe white should have made more of an effort to hold on to the c pawn. I don't know if this is miscalculating. Probably not, considering how strong these guys are, or what. But basically, this c pawn provides provides the connectedness of this connected pass pawn. So with the c pawn on c4, d6, I mean this pawn gets a lot more isolated and vulnerable. So with knight to f2, a4 was considered to be better, but I guess maybe the f2 was. I mean, I don't know. No, to be fair, the GM, I really do trust their judgment over mine. I to be fair though, if it makes you feel any better, I trust the computer over all the GMs instead, except maybe the top 3, top 5. But yeah, I'm expressing my opinion, but I trust their understanding over my understanding. But good point, Lauren. Maybe I should I can say that I can say that I prefer their or I can say that moves that they make don't necessarily make sense to me, but I do that with the understanding that my overall understanding is probably worse than theirs. That said, I trust the engine over any GM, so the engine trumps all at the end of the day. The GMs are just the computer beats everything. So rook to g4, rook to d4, rook to e6, and black has had very good technique in corralling this pawn. I don't know if white should have given up the c pawn so easily, but they did. So yeah. Right. Fair enough. Yeah, Lauren. That's an insightful thought. I will think about that. Rook to b6, rook to h4, king h4. And here I think black's up by about 2.5, 3 pawns. Rook to c4, rook to a3, rook takes. Cool. And yeah, I like black's position here. Looks like a win. So I don't know. I guess I'm like, how did this get away from white so badly? I'm sort of impressed here that the eval is so close. Because here I would figure, these guys have, the engine has perfect endgame technique. So maybe it's an obvious way to draw a 2-pawn up endgame. Like maybe there are resources, a rook, 2-pawn advantage in a rook and pawn endgame can sometimes be a draw, depending on your understanding of endgame studies. So maybe that's what they're going for. But yeah, it shifts a lot. I don't particularly get why is rook takes a3 bad here. Rook takes a3, king h4, and then black gets the connected pass pawns. Okay, got it. But yeah, crazy how this game shifted. Black just did such a great maneuver. I guess white over pushed is if you were to look at it from interesting. They happen, but on average. I don't know. But yeah. Anyways, I'm in favor of any basically any teaching, any free teaching. I'm in favor of. So I think that the free lessons that Chess Broads does are great, and yeah, all of that stuff I think is good. As long as everyone's giving lessons for free, I think it's good. But yeah. Yeah, it's one of those things. It is objective. It is objective. It is objective at the end of the day. But it's one of those rare things where our understanding of objectivity is not complete yet. It will be soon, but it isn't solved yet. So it's kind of cool. It's in that kind of in between stage where like we know the solution is coming, but it's not actually solved yet. So anyways, this was a great corralling maneuver for black, getting a lot of pressure on the d pawn, And yeah, this ends up in a solid position where black clears out the pawns and wins. Very interesting game. Interesting game. Excellent. Yeah, yeah. Good point, Lauren. For sure. Yeah. I mean, there used to be a much better. Life will be weird when it's solved. That is true. I agree. But there's many things that are helpful, right? I mean, to me, it's amazing that we can basically make chess lessons free. Like this is like one of these. As long as we're talking about, things that are advancing and are in between periods, we're right now in just my opinion, we're in this time period now where chess lessons still cost something, and that doesn't really work once things scale. For some reason, scaling hasn't completely happened to the chess lessons model yet. It hasn't happened to other educational models as well. But basically, people are doing a lot of very redundant teaching in chess. So we're in this time period where chess resources are becoming more and more available, but they haven't yet reached the point where it's completely saturated and they're free. I think the world will be much better when it's completely saturated and they're free, and when people with no resources at all have no advantage. Basically, the issue with chess knowledge, right? And one of the problematic things that I think about chess knowledge at this point is that if you are a wealthy person, you can pay someone to get private tutoring. Like you can pay basically $100 an hour to a GM and get resources that really aren't available to people with no resources, right? So if you have an economic advantage, you basically can press that economic advantage and turn it, basically turn yourself into a better chess player. It's actually very sad because you see people like I think it was one of the very strong young players like Mishra, I think maybe, but basically talking about the financial concerns that it was causing his parents to have kind of this persistent training. And what I think is, I think it's bogus that, you have to pay a teacher $50 an hour for something that can very easily be provided for free. This is why this stream exists. So as we're talking about the evolution of chess skill, I think it's also valuable to talk about the evolution of chess teaching. This stream scales, and it basically can scale to 1,000 people, if we were lucky enough. I saw basically GM Nixen's yesterday taught a lesson excellently with about 300 people, and there's no way that's not going to displace. I loved it. I thought it was awesome. But there's no way that's going to not displace paid lessons. It's too good is the point. Education can scale at chess. Yes, not every person can have every question answered for them 100% of the time, but education can scale. And that I think is a really important, general concept. And I think it's really going to be proven in chess, and then I think it's going to be proven in other places. But anyways, I think we're at a very interesting point here because very redundant chess teaching. 500 masters teaching the same, 500 2200 rated masters. I'm a 2200. I know we're not that good. But basically, 500 2200 masters are all giving the same lesson at the same time. And not literally, but they're basically giving the same quality lesson at the same time. And that is just redundant. We can just have a single stream, right? And a single 2200 or a single 2600 give a stream that's basically going to make, that's going to offset that effort that's getting duplicated in many different places. So I think in terms of the way that chess teaching and chess material becomes more and more available, I think that's going to be a really that's really what's going to step up. So chess teaching can scale, and I know it because I saw someone much better than me, GM Nixon's, teach 300 people at once yesterday. And I think we're at a really cool point. So that actually really makes me kind of excited. I'm a chess player. I know how to play chess. I don't know how to teach, linear algebra, but I do know how to teach chess. I'm trying. Thank you, Alexandria. I'm having a great time doing this. This is like, I have other things that I need to do, to be honest. But I actually really enjoy doing this. I enjoy being able to talk, and I enjoy being able to play chess. So it's really fun for you guys to be here, and you guys are You guys are the real MVP. You guys, it's me kind of pitching ideas to it's me pitching ideas to nobody, or me pitching ideas to people who are halfway interested in hearing it. So thank you guys very much for being here. Anyways, let's move on. This is basically this is Carlson. This is basically Carlson winning a game. And yeah, no, I thought it was awesome. 51 people. It's great. Yeah, GM Neekson. I advertised him. I gave him a shout out on my stream because I thought that his free lesson was so great yesterday. But yeah, let me send you his link. That he did a great boot camp yesterday for free on chess.com, and it showed exactly what I was interested in. This basically 300 person stream, basically chess education scaling excellently, which was the point of this. Let me just send you the let me just send you his link. This is his Twitch, but he gives free lessons. He gives free lessons on a semi-regular basis, and my hope is that he gives more and more of them to the point where he's giving them daily. He's great. I mean, if I was him, like, I would be giving chess lessons as I am now, because he could really make some headway in making this free chess lessons model the main model. But anyways, I think it's going to happen for sure. So, anyways, I thought GM Neekson's, if you're interested in him. Check out his past lessons, his free lessons that he's giving. Those are really gonna do what I wish that I could do. I think. So, anyways, he's great. Check him out. Thank you very much for the follow, Kuggin. Appreciate it. Thanks for the follow. Thank you for being here. And yeah, let's take a look at people's games. People have sent in some games, and I want to look at them. So we have 3 games for tonight. 3 games lined up. And here we go. Cool. All right, here's TK's game. TK is playing WFM Demeter. And here we go. Okay, so let's take it from White's perspective. Let's see. All right, so he's playing against the Owens defense. So the English defense is d4. So it's just so we know, and in case, because I'm actually really bad with names. I don't know my opening names, so I have been having fun kind of teaching myself them through the stream. But yeah, this thing is, basically d4 b6. Is the English defense, and e4 b6 is the Owens defense. They transpose into each other all the time, but that's the thing. So e4 b6, d4 bishop to b7, and White's got a lead of about 0.5. Black's playing a flank opening and a flank opening with the less favored bishop. So this does offer White, a better position and center. It's a hyper-modern opening, basically. Flank opening for Black versus it's a flank opening for Black versus a large center for White. Bishop to d3 defends d4. Main line here, I think, I'm not sure. I don't remember if it's bishop to d3 or not. Okay, it is. Bishop to d3 and knight to c3 are the 2 main lines. Bishop to d3 is more common. Okay, cool. Owens defense, e6, c4, f5. And here, basically, White's up by about 0.15. Knight to c3, bishop to b4, queen to e2. And yeah, basically Black has done his kind of standard hyper-modern thing where he's put pressure on the center. One of the values of this Owens defense is that Black can play f5 comfortably, knowing that on pawn takes f5, bishop takes g2. That's something that happens in this opening sometimes. But this fianchetto threat from the bishop is always going to be there. I mean, basically, as soon as the bishop fianchettos and the bishop plays to d3 as it does in the main line, f5 is going to be a threat on e4, and basically f5 is going to be threatening bishop to g2. c4, f5, knight to c3, bishop to b4, queen to e2, knight to f6, f3. Okay, it's about equal. Pawn takes, knight, bishop takes, pawn takes. Now white's much better. Black should not have traded off all of his pieces here. I don't think this was a favorable thing for black to do. White should play queen to e2, knight to f6, f3, pawn takes, and yeah. Basically here, white's going to have these 3 pawns, a solid, continued to be better center, and black's probably going to try to play like another undermining move, like maybe c5 or maybe d5, probably c5, after castling, and then basically this centers here. So b takes c3, knight takes c3, bishop takes e4 is an error. So here the move is actually knight to f3. With bishop takes e4, you're allowing this tactic. So basically, as white, everything was going fine. You built up this good center against a pretty conservative flank opening for black. But pawn takes c3, knight takes e4, and then the key move here, the key improvement for white, is knight to f3 as opposed to bishop takes e4. On bishop takes e4, queen to h4 forks the king and the bishop here. Yeah, this bishop takes e4, queen to h4, king to d1. Basically, black's going to be a good amount better here. Basically, white's going to win this pawn directly, and capitalize on the better center. The bishop's placed here. The knight can't really get out. The only way that this knight can get out is with f3, and with f3, this bishop can take f3, probably. But black's showing a good advantage, this pawn structure is way worse for white than it is for black. So that's really the main advantage, is this really fractured pawn structure for white, 4 different pawn islands versus 2 pawn islands for black. White has the better minor piece, but not really very important. And basically 4 pawn islands versus 2. That's that. Okay, so here's what's going to happen. Queen to e2, f3, pawn takes, bishop takes, pawn takes, knight takes e4, and bishop takes e4 is the mistake. Instead, knight to f3. Knight to f3 here, and basically white's up by about 1.5 pawns. The other way, this way that basically leaves white with the super fractured pawn structure, isn't materially any worse, but it causes white to have a worse pawn structure here. So what happens is knight takes, bishop takes, queen h4, king to d1, queen takes, bishop takes. Okay, so here basically knight f3, pawn takes, king f7. This situation, black's up by about 2.5 pawns. The other way isn't materially any worse for white, but it keeps the queen from getting into the territory. So knight to f3 here, and basically, knight takes c3 can be played potentially, but white has lost the same pawn as before, but the pawn structure is way less fractured. If the black knight wants to take on c3, it's taking a doubled pawn, so that's not like it's hugely important. And basically, white will be able to advance. So knight to f3 here, and then knight takes c3, queen to c2, or queen to e3. This is actually way better for white. You can sort of see why. I mean, basically, these 3 pawn islands for white is way better than what we were looking at before, where it was that crazy 4 fractured pawn structures. So anyways, that was the difference. This game was going well for white until, this basically simplification. Queen to h4, queen takes, knight f3, bishop takes, pawn takes. Four pawn islands here, and white is worse. This f3 pawn is super vulnerable. The rook can play like f8 and threaten it. In terms of it developing these pieces, I think the development route, maybe it should be c5. Or like, I'm thinking about how black's going to develop his pieces here. Rook to f8 makes sense. Rook to f8 develops with a threat. But how does the knight get out? I'm not sure. Anyways, king to f7, rook g1, knight to c6, bishop to g2. And yeah, black's way better. This knight gets out. This was the route, by the way. This is the one that black chose. I think this is probably a good idea. Maybe even rook to f8, knight to c6, knight to e7, knight to g6. That's probably the best way, or maybe even knight to f5. But yeah, that's probably the way that black should develop here. Black should advance. So yeah, I think that that's the better developing strategy. Black plays that knight to e7, knight to f5 maneuver, but I would have done it with the rook f8 as well. I guess black doesn't want white threatening on the g file and having an active threat on g7. Okay, interesting. But so far, this is basically all black's positional advantage. And yeah, at the end, black wins an exchange. Basically black uses this open file to play knight to e6. Rook to e5 was a blunder. This was a mistake, but the game's already sort of lost. Anyways, 2 improvements for white in this game. Overall, I thought this was really interesting. I thought you played the opening solidly against a flank opening. Basically, you got the control of the center, got a good position. And knight to f3 here is the move. Knight to f3 development, and keep the queen out of the position. With the queen in the position, it simplifies into a position with four basically isolated pawn islands, and that's bad. So bishop takes is worse. So this is the first move to improve. Knight takes e4, knight to f3 is the move. Okay, better. And then with bishop takes e4, queen takes, everything simplifies. Then you're down basically for the rest of the game. And then the final thing to change here, with rook takes d8 is kind of necessary, because with rook to e5 here, knight to e3 just directly wins an exchange. So anyways, really interesting situation. And with knight to e3, maybe rook takes e3, maybe. But yeah, I guess that's what I would say here is this is a really interesting situation. Yeah. So those are the 2 moves of improvement. Rook to takes d8, and as opposed to rook to e5, which doesn't allow knight to e3. And then the other improvement was not liquidating the center and giving yourself a bad pawn structure. So basically playing knight to f3 instead of bishop takes e4 there. You were still lost for the e4 pawn, but knight to f3 was a better continuation. Anyways, really interesting, very interesting game. Thank you very much for sending it, TK. Thanks for all the games you send. They're interesting to look at. Usually gets pretty strong players. So yeah, thank you very much, TK. Thanks for sending the game. Here's the next one. This one is from Calcina. Interesting. So Calcina's playing a GM here. Cool. Yeah, for sure, Quasi. Let me give you the link. It takes a bit we're a little bit backlogged in terms of how many games people have sent in. But yeah, please send a game in to this Discord. I'll give you the link right now, Quasi. The Discord right here is if you send a game in the game submission section, I'll confirm I'll confirm when it'll be. It may take a little bit longer than ideal at the moment. I'm gonna try to figure out how to do this in July, and hopefully July will have a better setup for this. But you'll send it, and I'll give you a confirmation time for that game as soon as I can. It's probably gonna be about a week, to be honest. It just takes a while. Hey, no problem. No problem, Unconquered Foe. Thank you very much for joining the stream. Thanks for being here. No, I'm really happy to provide the lessons for free. I think this is a big step forward. I was very encouraged by seeing GM Neeksons do a similar idea yesterday, and yeah, free lessons. This is where it's going to be. This is what it's going to be, and I'm happy that I get to work on such a big project. Basically, very cool stuff. And cool stuff. How often do you actually get to do something that has the potential to do something significant? I don't know. It's interesting. Somewhat, a high-level GM's going to do this and really get some mileage. Anyways, but yeah, thanks for being here, Unconquered. Yeah, so I do them twice a day. I do streams twice a day at 8 a.m. Eastern Time and 9:35 p.m. Eastern Time. I work around kind of the other things I do in my schedule. I take a lot of class and stuff. But yeah, twice a day. So the morning sessions there's usually more people here. But yeah, thanks very much for being here. Yeah, a lot of other things, but this is like the highlight of my day. This is actually really fun for me to do. Okay, so let's look at this opening. Well, thanks for coming by, Unconquered. Next one is at 8 a.m. Eastern. Maybe that one's a little bit better. I guess that'll be the same day for you. Uh, let's see. So yeah, Calcina is playing this opening correctly, I think. I think queen to c2 is the main line. e6 turns this into Slav, semi-Slav. Bishop to g5, bishop to e7, e3. And basically, I think this is, I think there's no problems for black's position here. Let's take a look at the eval too, but I don't see any problems for black. I think this is just your standard opening. Pretty well analyzed opening lines, like 100 lines here and stuff. Knight d7, knight d2, a6, bishop to d3. Okay, so I think that here a6 is probably an error. Knight to d2 is an unusual move. Knight to c3 is what's played more frequently here. So yeah, in this Slav line, knight to c3 tends to be more common. Knight to d2 is like Tarash, I don't know Tarash, but yeah, it's basically a much less pressing knight move. But that's what this high-level player plays, so knight to d2, a6. I think instead here, castles probably is probably better. That's the main line. I think that a6 sort of opens up your, it might not matter, but opens up your dark squared pawns. It's sort of like, what's the point of a6 is my question. So I think this is probably the first move to reevaluate a6 here. Let's see what the engine thinks. I think a6 is probably not super helpful because I think it's not purposeful enough, right? Like, maybe it prevents a very strong, like a very aggressive queenside advance. But the thing about a6 is that this a6 is weakening the pawn. It's you still need to castle. You still need to do a couple things related to development here. So castle's probably knight to b6. There's developing moves here that are correct for black, and I think that with a6, right, you're kind of you're playing a move that really only has one purpose to it, which is to prevent b5. But I think on f takes d5, it's not as if you're going to play c takes d5. You would play e takes d5, and that's helpful in getting your bishop out. So I think that a6 isn't a purposeful enough move. So I would go with the mainline castling instead. Again, not terrible, not really going to cause you any problems, but I think it's just not purposeful enough at this stage in the opening where you're still developing. Bishop to d3, pawn takes c4. So yeah, h6, bishop to h4, castles. White's up about 0.3, 0.4. c5, pawn takes. Okay, cool. This actually looks like it played out pretty well. C takes d4, I think, is an error. Let's just see. Is this still... All right, so we're out of the opening book. I would not have played c takes d4 as white here. I don't know how strong this player is, but I would not have played c takes d4. I would have played knight takes d4 instead. C takes d4 gives the white an isolated queen's pawn, and the weaknesses that come with that. But I don't know. It also gives white better center control technically, because this white center pawn in d4 is controlling squares in the center. So d4. Knight to d5, queen takes, bishop to e4, bishop takes, knight takes. Yeah, I like this. This is just fine for black, actually. Black needs to develop the light-scored bishop and the queenside rook, but shouldn't have any problems doing that. I think there's going to be some imprecise play here. I think we might have an option to improve over here somewhere. Okay, all right. Let's go back. I just wanted to go through the very end of that very quickly. But let's take a look at this instead. Where I'm looking at for an improvement for black is around here. So here I think things are about equal, maybe even slightly better for black. Like this situation really makes sense. White's pawn structure is slightly worse. White has, basically black has a better pawn structure and the better minor piece. But he has problems with development on the queen side. So how's black going to untangle this? Like, rook to d6, queen to b4, rook to b6. So this is the mistake that that the engine's pointing towards. What was better here? Um, I don't know, because bishop to d7 isn't playable, right? And rook to b8 is basically an attempt to set up bishop to d7 on the next move. That's what this is. Rook to b8 basically is making it so that the bishop can play to d7 on the next move. Instead, I think that the engine's pointing towards queen to d8. b5 is interesting. I guess I would probably think about playing b5. b5 and then rook to c6 is a tactic. But then I think you play rook to d7 and it all sort of concludes. So that was the improvement. The engine has some crazy queen to d8 line. We could take a look at that too. Queen to d8, rook to f d1 or something. But that feels like a very inhuman move to me. Which technically could mean that it's good, but... Anyways, so let's think about this. So let's go front to back on this game. I think there's two things that I would change in this game. Overall, it makes sense. I think a6 is a little bit slow, so I wanted to just it's not bad. I just think that it doesn't advance black's position as much as straightforward developing moves do. That's the first thing to look at here. I think instead castling over a6 is better. Bishop to d3, pawn takes, all this makes sense. I didn't really like pawn takes for white. And let's just look at this. What was the eval? What was the accuracy eval? 88s. Okay. But yeah, here's what I would have played. This I think is your big improvement of the game. That a6 pawn's kind of small, but this b5 is big. So b5 here is your way of getting this bishop out, in my opinion. I think this is your best strategy. Queen to d8. Okay, so let's. I mean, we looked at the queen to d8 line for a second, but b5 seems like a very intuitive strategy for developing your bishop. This makes a lot of sense. Gets your bishop to the fianchetto square, and basically increases your mobility in a very clear way. These pawns don't get weak. And you have an attack on this weak pawn. So here, this is my change. So rook to b8, and you run into problems. So rook to b8, and then knight to e5, and then basically knight to a5, and there's threats like knight to c6. Knight to c6 becomes the big tactical threat for white here. But I think b5 is your move. I think b5 over rook to b8. Because rook to b8 sets up knight to e5, knight to c6, and threats on the rook on b8. b5, and you have a comfortable place to develop your bishop. Bishop to b7 facing g2. Makes sense. And yeah, I guess that's what I would say. And if rook to c6, then your response is rook to d7. So overall, that's what I would. That's an improvement in this game. I'm not sure if there's any others. I think overall, thought this was a pretty intuitive game. Made sense. And then queen to d8 here is not good. So yeah, so here's basically these errors have kind of compounded. This rook on b8 is really becoming a liability. So queen to d8, and then the move here, it's a big miss, is knight to c6. Knight to c6, and you've got this exchange one. So that was the improvement for white. Thankfully, white didn't see that. But yeah, a big tactic. Queen to b1 also runs into issues. Yeah, this simplifies. Okay, so there's two main mistakes here, and they're both the biggest mistakes in this game. We talked about a6. I'm not counting those as one of those two. The big mistakes here were first rook to b8, rook to b8, and this knight to e5, knight to c6 becomes a possibility. Threats on this rook on b8 could become a problem. Okay. Then queen to d8 doesn't really fix the problem. Knight to c6 is still going to be a tactic that white can play, and queen to d8 plays there. And then at the final part of this game, queen to b1 allows rook to e1, and here I don't know. I mean, basically white's kind of displacing this queen. This queen can't go anywhere super comfortably. Queen takes a2. It's just kind of out of the action, and there's a lot of tactics here where this queen could be useful and can't be. But I mainly wanted to focus on rook to b8 and queen to d8. The knight to c6 threat got missed by both sides, so you were okay. But there were two tactical improvements there. So I think that leads to tactical study is probably the way forward on that. But two big tactical improvements for black. Thankfully, white didn't see them. This game again got super volatile. But yeah, that knight to c6 threat is a big one to think about. And basically, be careful with that rook on b8 because it can become subject to threats on threats from knight to c6. Anyways, really interesting game. Let's take a look at the next one. But yeah, thank you very much for sending the game, Calcina. Appreciate it. Okay, and here's one more by TK. I didn't realize he had two, but he does. So let's take a look at TK's game. And TK's playing an IM. YF Smurf is an IM, I guess. Okay, e4, e5, knight f3, knight c6, d3. Okay. So they're playing the Guaco piano, two knights defense. Everyone likes the Traxler. The Traxler is knight to g5 here. Or knight to g5 followed by bishop to c5. Bishop to c5, c3, a5, h3. Okay. White's up by about 0.1 pawns. Okay, this is a big error for black. Let's think about why this is. First, I don't necessarily understand what the positives of it are. So like here, I mean, are we in theory? I guess we're not in theory anymore. This all seems pretty straightforward. So that rook takes f6 positional threat is really strong. Interesting. Yeah, rook takes f6. That seems actually really strong. These knights are advancing on the king side pretty fast. Interesting. Should black, basically black needs to defend against that threat. This threat isn't there until then. Black misses it. But yeah, really interesting. Basically that threat of rook takes f6, not super obvious to me, but valuable. Rook takes f6, pawn takes f6, knight g4. Yeah, I like this situation a lot. This nice knight facing on f6. Maybe queen to e6, maybe f5. I don't know. Yeah, so this kind of collapsed. Interesting. I wonder if the collapse, I guess it was totally unavoidable. Queen to d8 is the correct defensive move. Wow, just a really overpowering attack by white. Great play by white. Let's think about this. So yeah, this allowing rook takes f6 is just really powerful. But man, these are hard to see. I guess I don't know. I guess I don't get attacked that often, to be honest. I don't see that many kingside attacks come in. But for some reason, I would just not see rook takes f6. It's obvious when you think about it, but really interesting. Yeah, so the engine's recommending queen e6, queen e7, and queen d8. Basically saying that rook takes f6 just can't be allowed. Like c6 or something random, I assume it's still rook takes f6. So, I don't know. Really interesting stuff, in my opinion. Like, this sack is just overpowering. Just interesting play. Yeah. So queen e6, queen e7. Hey, thank you very much for the follower, P. Thank you very much for joining the stream. So yeah, I think that's it. King to h7, I think, was the error. Queen to e6, queen to e7, queen to d8. I think just rook takes f6 can't be allowed. That's basically the objective truth here, right? Like, there's just not much of a play after rook takes f6. It's a great tactic. I mean, worth knowing, right? Basically, there's plenty of situations in which you're gonna see an open knight on f6, and I wouldn't necessarily think to do that immediately. Even with attacking, even I've done a lot of attacks similar to this as white, but yeah, it's a really great demonstration. Really interesting game, TK, for sure. Showing off some really interesting, strong opening play. Italian game, rook takes f6 sacrifice. Let's just see how he converts. So rook takes f6, pawn takes f6, knight g4, and then something defends f6. Then rook to f1 using this open file and threats on f6. Knight takes, king g6. Yeah, black's totally busted. Interesting. Very interesting situation. These accuracy scores. All right, there you go. 99% accuracy score for white. I was like, what did white even do wrong here? Like 99%. That's pretty good. Let's look at the very few errors that black made. King to h7 seems to be really the only kind of major error. I think other than king to h7, this is just good. Let's see. Let's take a look. Sometimes I do this. Let's cut the game down to just the moment before king to d8. Or sorry, the moment before king to h7. Let's just look up to the first 15 moves instead and see what the accuracy score is there for black, because I think it's got to be close to 100%. I'm just not seeing anything, any improvements really. Oh, I messed it up. I think. Sorry, just bear with me while I load this thing. I'm actually just really curious to see after queen to d7, what the accuracy score is for white here, white and black here. It's pretty cool how they can just deal with that text. Yeah, this is what I thought. Okay, cool. Yeah, this is exactly what I thought. Just a very, very accurate game. Okay, so king to h7 is basically the main issue for black here. I was trying to think of things to do that were better for black, before allowing rook takes f6. But if you cut that game down, it's 98.5 to 98.7. I'm pretty comfortable that I can't add too much to that. So thank you for sending the very strong game, TK. King to h7. Overall, that kingside attack really was a very good instructive attack. I'll have to think more about that rook takes f6 check and how I can incorporate it into my games. But yeah, with the knight on h2, the doubling of the pawns on the bishop file is really a problem for black. So anyways, very interesting games. Thank you for sending those games, TK. Thank you very much, everybody, for contributing material for the stream. And yeah, the next stream is at 8 a.m. Eastern time tomorrow, about 9 hours from now. And yeah, I'm looking forward to seeing you there. Thank you very much for joining today. Thank you very much for everyone who played in the simul. That was very nice of you guys. Fun stuff. And the next free lesson, the free lesson is at 8 a.m. Eastern time tomorrow morning, 9 hours from now. So thanks all for joining me today. Thanks all for participating in everything. And yeah, I'm looking forward to seeing you soon. Thanks. Have a good night, everyone. Appreciate you being here. Thanks. Bye.